Hey everyone, so today's video we're going to carry on with our dungeon series. I've already done Tulpa, and I know maybe some of you were expecting Queen of Tides or Ash Magisteria, but because we are having a Witch of the Wind rally, I figured I'd just follow suit here and make a video on Witch of the Wind. So let's talk about her. Okay. So, some good news and some bad news with Witch of the Wind, right? The bad news is this is an endgame kind of dungeon, right? The requirements for your gear and your heroes are much higher than that of the original 3 dungeons, the red, green, and blue dungeons, right? So these 3 dungeons, the gear requirements and the speed requirements are much less. Also, hero requirements are much less for these dungeons than Witch of the Wind or Gemini Dragon. So you won't be farming this until a little later for a couple of reasons. The main one, as I mentioned, is the speed. You need really high speed for Witch of the Wind on top of still getting damage stats. So that is the bad news. The good news is there's really only one gear set in this dungeon that's worth farming for, and it is Assassin. Now, the other 2 sets, they do have some uses, here and there. The Raptor set, 20% focus, it's not bad. It's just there's so many better sets that this 20% focus just isn't enough. There aren't, dungeons or game modes in the game where extremely high focus is needed, so this set isn't relevant right now. It might become more relevant with new content added in the game, but right now it's just not relevant. Assassin set, like I said, is one of the best damage dealing sets in the game. It's really worth farming for. I have a lot of my damage dealing heroes in Assassin set. It's much better for single target damage dealers, where Avarice in Ash Magisteria is definitely better for your AoE damage dealers, but for single target, Assassin set's the way to go. And then this Faith set is almost completely useless, except for maybe one hero, which is 1 or 2 heroes maybe, but the main one is definitely Flarence. So anyway, so that's the good news. You only are missing out on one key set if you can't farm this dungeon. So anyway, so let's talk about a little bit of the mechanics here. Okay, so as I mentioned, Witch of the Wind is really speedy, and these requirements go up the further you come along into this dungeon. When you're Hell Stage 4, I'm pretty sure the minimum requirement is like 210 speed or 220. I'm not sure about the speeds specifically to make sure you move in front of the witch, but it's pretty high. So that's the first thing. On top of that, she has this Thunder mode, which is really special to her dungeon, where whenever she falls below 50% health, she has this mechanic called Thunder mode, where she grants herself 5 lightning orbs at the start of the round. And then whenever she uses an attack, she consumes all of the orbs that she currently has on her and increases the damage of her attacks by 100% for each orb. So if she has 5 orbs on her, her attacks will do 500% more damage, which is a real issue, which is why you tend to want to be faster than her so your heroes can attack her and reduce these lightning orbs, because every time that she is hit, it reduces her lightning orbs by 1. So if you're faster than her and you're attacking her with 4 heroes, she'll only be doing 100% more damage on her attacks with that 1 lightning orb if you don't have a team that does multiple attacks, but we'll get into that. She also has some attacks that does bleeding, which does some, damage over time effects to you, so it chips away at your health. She also has a no positive effects AoE, which can be pretty detrimental, like if you're banking on shields or anything like that. So that's something to mention. And then her minions, one of the minions does an AoE attack down on your team, so it's preventing you from doing more damage. And then another minion actually grants the witch a very large shield that can't be removed to my knowledge. So those are her mechanics, right? Whenever you're scaling up through this dungeon, similar to Tulpa, you have to have enough damage to be able to kill the waves and get to the boss while having full health or almost full health on your team, so you can survive the witch, right? So sustain as well as having enough damage to kill the waves, and then team speed is really important. You got to go before the waves or have enough damage where you're killing the waves in one shot, so you're not taking a whole lot of damage before you get to the boss. And then also, whenever you're working on your team compositions, you have to focus on multiple attacks on the boss. And this all stays relevant throughout the rest of the higher stages. So as you scale, all of these things are still important. So that's a little bit of the mechanics for Witch. One thing I didn't mention on Tulpa is they have this really nice feature in-game where if you click on this little like floppy disk or bookmark looking thing underneath the magnifying glass where it shows the mechanics of the dungeon, you'll also see the top used teams. So this is the top formations, and then they also show, which hero is used the most if you go down to hero report, and then they also have some videos, that reference to guides, so that's kind of neat. So if you need any help, they do have some direct links to, these dungeon guides where they'll show you the gear requirements, they'll show you the speeds, so please utilize that to your best advantage. But just, filtering through some of these hero formations, you can see heroes that we'll be talking about when I go through the index, right? So Florence is one of the best heroes for endgame dungeons, for progression in the game. I've been seeing some things float around that new players can get Florence with, a beginner's chest or whatever. I highly recommend anyone watching these videos, if you're a brand new beginner and you haven't opened that chest yet, 100% get Florence. She scales 100% with the game. She's used by every single person everywhere. She's probably the best hero in the game for PvE content. It is probably a toss-up with Shane, which is another great option, but he is not, I don't think he's an option in that chest like Florence is, but I digress. So Florence, on her ultimate, allows the rest of your team to do bonus attacks. So that's playing into one of those things that I mentioned here where you want to have multiple attacks on the boss to reduce those lightning orbs, right? So Florence plays into that. Marion Shadowblood, she does joint attacks with your allies, right? Anytime that your allies attack, she has a chance to come in and attack as well, further reducing that lightning orb count on Witch. And then she also does damage based on the enemy's max HP. So she's not only there to reduce the multiple attacks, but she also has decent damage output. William is here, to give one of your heroes defense up, which is nice, but then he gives your entire team counterattack. So then that's even more attacks against the witch to reduce lightning orbs if they're slower, or it's also there just to reduce the damage, reduce the time that you're in this dungeon because your damage dealers are attacking more, so they're doing more damage. And then Nathalia is always the premier choice for epics, in regards to being able to clear waves and deal nice damage on the boss herself. So please take use of this formation report, as they call it here. This is stage 16, which is a little different. You'll see on stage 14 or Hell 2 that there are some poison teams, like with Gangello. If you have Gangello and you're progressing through the game, definitely feel free to use him all the way up to Hell 2 stages. Same thing with Santis. These two heroes are still used in stage 16 of Gemini Dragon. So if you use resources in them, they will not go wasted. I promise. And then stage 12, same thing. You'll see a lot of poison teams. So that's kind of nice. But anyway, so that's the dungeon itself. I will go through the index here real quick and just talk about some other heroes that are viable. And then actually at the end of the video, I'll show you what team I'm using currently and just walk you through why I'm using this team, just as a reference, right? Okay, so because this is an endgame dungeon, you're going to be at the point in your account when you're farming this that elites won't even be necessary. Like, you'll have enough epic choices that an elite hero is not going to help you complete that dungeon. You're going to have to use epic and legendaries. So, from the light and dark options here, right? So for light heroes, I think the only one that has some relevance in which there's actually a couple. So Evelyn First On is a pretty nice choice if you end up having her and you miss the Attack on Titan event, collaboration event at the beginning of January in 2023, because they have released a free hero that you most likely have over Evelyn First On. But if you have Evelyn, she gives your team, some sustain with that defense, but then she also has this ability where she grants your allies that bonus turn. So additional attacks, and then on top of that, she has joint attacks on her special ability. She also decreases the witch's power or defense with defense down 2. So Evelyn is definitely an option there. Brand the Brilliant is also an option as well for a tank team. This may not work up in the higher stages like Hell Stage 4. It probably still works on Hell Stage 2. But all of his damage comes from the enemy max HP, right? Max health. So he's a really good tank option, and he can be used just as your only damage dealer. The run might be slow, but it can 100% work. Crazed Urzag is actually another option as well because he does that joint attack with his special ability, so it can reduce the orb count. He can help you clear some of the waves. I will say he's probably one of the weaker choices. I don't know if I would recommend him, but he is an option to have in a team composition if you're limited, which is quite funny for me to say about Light and Darks if you have certain Light and Dark heroes, but then you're limited in your team composition for Witch of the Wind. That's kind of humorous to me. Okay. Other than that, Alistar is actually one of the newer heroes that could probably be used here because he does have an ultimate ability that can be used multiple times. The only issue is I'm pretty sure this is random, the amount of times that he uses this. So with his trait, he builds up rage, and then he consumes that rage and mimics or duplicates his ultimate or his basic, depending on what you did, based on the amount of rage he has. So if he has 4 rage, he'll use his ultimate 4 times if you use the ultimate, right? But it even says here that it'll be on one random enemy. So there is a chance that he doesn't hit the boss and he hits her minions, so he's probably not your safest bet. Sacred Windstrex is actually pretty nice. She ends up giving your team this shield, increases their damage output, and then also removes a negative effect while healing them. So this could be a really good sustain option for you. Being able to remove that no positive effects that the witch puts up on your team is pretty nice. And then also on her special, she removes negative effects. It gives your team defense up all across the board. And then defense down and attack down just on her basic. So Sacred Windstrex is another nice light option in the epic section. As far as these other 3 that I don't have, I don't think they're really viable in any of the witch teams. So don't really use there. Any of these heroes aren't really an option other than Marion Shadowblood, who's definitely one of the most used heroes. I used to use her as well until I ended up having my speed team that I currently have. But she was a really nice pick because of that ally joint attack on her trait. And then on her ultimate ability, She does true damage equal to 8% of the target's max health, which is really nice. But then she gets this Unholy Redemption, which reduces the amount of damage that she takes and gives herself lifesteal. So she has a lot of sustain built in while being a really effective damage dealer. So Marion Shadowblood is definitely top-notch in Witch of the Wind. She's actually top-notch for a lot of endgame content, even Queen of Tides, that dungeon as well. So Marion Shadowblood is just a really nice epic to invest in. She's really good in Guild Boss as well. So Aubrey's probably an okay option. It does give your team immunity as well as some sustain with this. Any team member under enemy heals any team member under enemy attack below 50% health. So anytime they're under 50% health and they're hit, Aubrey heals them up by 15%. So that gives your team some sustain. But if you have, again, like these Light and Dark legendaries, you probably have better options in the red, green, blues areas where you won't need to use Aubrey. Imogen's another one that does joint attacks, similar to, Marion Shadowblood, but I really think that Marion Shadowblood outclasses Imogen just because of the enemy max health. Imogen's probably a little better on the waves, but overall, Marion Shadowblood's going to be a better option for you, but Imogen is okay. If you have Vengeful Hassle, you basically just win the game. So you can bring this guy into any team with any composition, and I'm exaggerating here, obviously, but he's that good. If you put him in your team, he revives your team. He reduces the cooldown of his ultimate ability, which revives everybody. And it seems like the game's a little bugged right here where it's not showing what his ultimate does. But he's very good. And you should 100% use him in any team that you can. He's probably not the fastest, so if you do have some of these speed teams that I'll reference, then he might not be a need for you, but if you're starting the game out and you pulled him, then the game should be pretty easy for you. Dark Valeria is another one that she's a great wave clearer, and then also being able to attack at the end of each round. She's probably pretty viable for Witch of the Wind. I don't have her to test, but I would think that she is an option for sure. If you have her. Shark Soul Andre, he might be an option as well, because whenever the Witch puts up debuffs on your team, he'll remove them, and then he'll counterattack and get a bonus turn, so he probably does pretty well against the Lightning Orbs, but that's all he's doing. So yeah, that's Light and Darks. From a wood perspective, Bulin is actually a pretty good choice as well. She's a nice AoE damage dealer for the waves. And then on top of that, she builds up that rage, which once she gets to 5, she consumes it and then attacks anybody with induction. So she can hit the boss as well, while probably doing pretty good damage, and then also filling the role of the wave clear. So Bulin is a really nice choice for Witch as well. On top of that, I think I used Yolanda in my earlier stages of Witch. One, because she has really fast-paced speed, so being able to build her tanky with health while easily hitting the speed requirements is something that you should be able to do with Yolanda. She also grants immune and attack up 2, as well as bonus turns to your highest damage dealer. She removes those negative effects that the Witch will put on your team. And then she also has this really nice big shield that she can put on your team for sustain as well. So Yolanda is also a really nice choice. Avera actually isn't bad. She's a pretty decent wave clearer. You'll probably have to invest some resources into her, which I would not recommend. But she does have multiple attacks on her in her kit, whether it's on her ultimate, on her trait, on her special. All of these things grant extra attacks. So if you build her fast enough with enough attack, she does have the ability to clear waves and also fill the role of reducing the amount of lightning orbs on the witch. So that's kind of cool. Like I said, if you have Gangelo in the early stages of your account, you can use him on 4 out of the 5 all 5 dungeons, actually. You can use him on all 5 dungeons up to Hell Stage 2. So build him for sure, and just look at, Gangelo dungeon teams on YouTube, and you will find tons. These next couple, so Savannah you should avoid for Witch. She's not really viable there. Rachel is actually somewhat viable as well, because she gives that spike restoration to your team, so anytime they're hit, it restores 15% of their health, and then also attack up 2 to all of your allies, which is cool. And then she also has this special ability where it deals... Oh, no, sorry. I'm thinking of something else. Anyway, she has this. She has spiked restoration and attack up on your entire team, which is really nice. And then she has defense down on her A1. So some self-sustain there while also increasing your damage. Shane is one of the main pieces to any kind of speed dungeon team. I use him in almost all of my dungeon teams, and I'll show you mine here in a little bit whenever we go through the dungeon itself. He has this law of karma, which is unique to him, where if the how do I word this? If the enemy who has this debuff on them is attacked by a unit outside of that unit's turn, meaning joint attack or mainly joint attack, right? Or ally attack, whatever. That person will do 30%, 30% more damage. Excuse me, sorry about that. And then also puts attack down, but then he also has attack up and damage up to the ally with the highest attack on your team. So that is really awesome. And then he also has defense down 2 on his basic, which pairs really well with Clarence, and I'll show that in my team as well. So if you have Shane, he is top-notch for this dungeon. Goobeg probably has a role if you have a Goobeg, just because he gets some bonus turns at the beginning of the turn, and he'll most likely always be the fastest, so he could probably reduce the lightning orbs on the witch, but that will be his only role, so I wouldn't say he's like a viable option. Fiona, I don't think is viable here. Same thing with Adet. I don't think she's viable. Same thing with Donovan. Mathasia can be okay just because of her sustainability, removing debuffs and keeping people healed up, so she's probably a nice option. I've seen 1 or 2 teams that ran Ashlyn. They must have had her built a certain way, or they manualed the run, because Ashlyn doesn't really work on auto. Her AI is kind of weird. She's not bad, but it is not a viable option for consistent runs, in my opinion. Jocasta is another nice option for sustain as well, if you don't have, like Clarence or a speed team with Shane. She will remove those no positive effects that the witch puts out, as well as granting your team defense up and then giving someone immune, so that's kind of cool. Antinua is actually one of the speedrunners in Witch of the Wind. If she's built with enough damage as well as speed, she can one-shot the witch on the very first turn, which is really cool with like Shane and Clarence, so that's pretty neat. All of these other heroes aren't really viable. Vance, Edicris, not really. Hitoshi is probably okay as a damage dealer for waves, maybe up through stage 12, I would guess. Other than that, he's going to need book investment, and I just don't think that he would be your best bet if you're looking for a Witch of the Wind team. He's okay, but again, I think there are better options. I know that like Zatlux, who Hitoshi has kind of replaced, in regards to Zatlux's role, was used up until Hell Stage 2. So, like, he would be viable there if you have the gear. But with books being introduced, I think there's much easier ways to allocate your resources to be cross-functional against multiple dungeons, where you wouldn't have to book your Hitoshi to get through there. So same thing with Zatlux as Hitoshi. Silent is more of a PvP hero. I don't think she's your best bet for this dungeon. Orchi, again, kind of same thing with PvP versus PvE. So Baron can get you through the waves for sure, with her ultimate ability and this passive. If she's built strong enough, if you have her booked, she might be able to one-shot waves and get you to the boss. But after that, because the boss only has 2 minions, her passive won't ever be activating, so she'll be a lot less effective in that fight. But if you need a wave clear and you have everything else handled in the boss, Baron might be an option. Windstrex isn't bad because she can help you deal with the speed issue that you have with Witch. But again, I think this is probably not the most consistent or safest bet, because then you're just banking on total damage, raw damage. So even though Windstrex does help with the speed differences, it might not be your safest bet in regards to a consistent safe team. As far as these other heroes, not really viable. There might be a composition with Gajar just because of the poison explosions, but I'm sure the speed tune, for the lower stages is probably difficult. So I probably wouldn't bother there. Same thing with Kane. Arendelle does have some joint attacks on his passive, which is kind of interesting, but he just doesn't do enough in his kit, so all he would do would be reducing those lightning orbs. I wouldn't recommend that. These other heroes, not really viable. I'm sure there's plenty of bleed comps out there with Barclay. Barclay opens up a lot of bleeding comps just from his damage output, so that's kind of cool. He also brings in a ally for a joint attack on his ultimate. So that's pretty neat. If you have some bleed teams, you should look up on YouTube again, bleed comps for Witch of the Wind. So yeah, he's pretty cool too for Witch. Okay, moving on. So for Fire, I don't think Alicia is a really viable option for Witch. Geralt, same thing, just single target damage probably isn't enough, although he can get multiple turns if he's A5. But it's one of those things where I think you just have better options for sure. Flarence, like I said, grants those bonus turns to your team on her ultimate along with the sustain, so that's really nice if you have her. Bachelard, nope. Bella, nope. Cirrus, nope. There are some Zitlin comps. I used to use Zitlin as well. In one of my comps, I think it was like Zitlin, Marion Shadowblood, and then William in Nathalia, and that worked. It was like a minute 30 team, so that was kind of cool. So he's definitely a viable option, but he's going to need specific comps, and it's going to be more about damage output than survivability. He's going to try and kill the boss like in 1 or 2 turns. Hector, no. Brand is actually a really nice option. He gives your team a lot of sustain. He can remove the no positive effects on your team. He also counterattacks as well, so that could help with some lightning orb action. It also decreases the attack on the witch if his focus is high enough, so that's pretty cool. Balbirth, no. Ralph might be an option as well, just because if he's A5, he has that really big shield, or if you build him fast enough, he might be able to help you with the waves, similar to what I was saying in Tulpa. I do think you probably have better options, though, if you have a Ralph. So, yeah. Giranol, I don't think is an option for this dungeon like she was in Tulpa. Darcy's terrible, don't use her. Alicia is PvP only. Levi, no. Gavin, no. Matson might have a role in here as well. Same thing against Tulpa, he does have that ally attack for the lightning orb reduction, as well as some sustain on his vampiric touch, so that's kind of cool. I don't think Rosalie is needed in this dungeon either. Taliesin probably is a decent wave clear with a bleed comp, like I said with Barclay. So on his basic, he also gives bleeding, so he might be able to fit into a nice bleed comp because his ultimate ability will not do that true damage equal to max health, because his ultimate does not work on bosses, but from a wave clearing perspective, he's probably pretty good. Valeria is probably okay for wave clearing, but other than that, not really viable. I think you're better off using Baron or Nathalia. And then a bunch of these other heroes here. Zac might be viable for clearing waves, but he's probably outclassed by plenty of other heroes. Jacob, no. Melissa, no. Philidia, I don't think so. Scarlet is part of those bleed comps, so she is nice but very specific. Aurak, no. Trista, no. Borin, no. Mognar, no. Azrina, no. Same thing here. No, 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 no. So those are your routes for fire. And then last but not least, we have water here. So this new Grayson guy, he does give your team attack up too, which is kind of cool, but he's more specific for the Ash dungeon. Tia could probably work, as she gives some pretty decent control on the waves to help you deal with some of the speed issues, but at the same time, I think she's probably too linear, so I wouldn't go that route. Now, Opal is fantastic. Opal is great in Witch of the Wind. She's great in Queen of Tides, and then she's also great in Ash Magisteria. I actually have Opal booked. She was one of the first heroes that I booked because of the speed compositions that Opal brings to dungeons. She does this joint attack on her ultimate, but if one of the enemy dies, this actually stacks up, so she'll have it for like 2 or 3 turns, and it carries over into the waves, so that's really neat. She also removes negative effects on her basic abilities. Opal deserves a whole video, but she is one of the top tier heroes for those speed dungeons. Nero's not really viable here. Same thing with Pluto. Halia is a much better option than Winstrix, who we were talking about before, because her speed carries over. So that's really nice. Where with Winstrix, it has to be activated at the start of every round. So you can have your team built really slow or slower and prioritize damage if you have Halia. She also has that special ability that grants someone a bonus turn. So that's also a nice thing in regards to dealing additional damage to the witch to kill her quicker. So she might be able to work like in a Zitlin comp or something like that, right? So Tashir, Mulhex, no. Hydrisia, no. This is another bleed hero, Mikasa, but this was one of those Attack on Titan heroes. So if you didn't play Ace at the beginning of the year in 2023, you won't have her. But she is one of the great heroes in the game for bleed comps. Really high damage dealing unit, so pretty cool. Ciara is actually a really nice unit in Witch of the Wind. She can help you clear some waves, and she can do some really nice damage to the boss as well. So she's a pretty good option. Alune, no. I don't think I've seen Thor in a whole lot of bleed comps, but because of my lack of knowledge on the bleed comps, I could be wrong here. But if he is, then he's viable. If he's not a viable option in those bleed comps, you don't want to be using him in Witch. Hyam, same thing. So Aaron is another one of those Attack on Titan heroes from the collaboration event that has opened up a world of new team comps. He has this ultimate ability where he brings in the entire team to do their basic ability, which is extremely cool. And on top of that, on his trait, once he gets enough rage, which is at 8 rage,
he'll actually consume all that and use his ultimate ability again for free, right? Even if it's on cooldown or something. And he gets that by having negative effects applied to the enemy. So he's used in bleed teams because a lot of the bleed teams put up multiple negative effects per turn, which triggers his ultimate, and then from his trait. So Aaron is one of the great speed dungeon runners. So you definitely want to look into those comps. He doesn't need to be in a speed team. He can just be in, a team with like Shane is where he's most used, Shane or Clarence. So definitely look into that. Blackhorn is really nice as well. It's one of the few dungeons that I think he excels in with tank comps. He has a nice special ability that summons this totem that removes negative effects from your team at the end of the round, as well as healing them. And then he has this big heal over time, along with attack down on his basic. So Blackhorn is pretty nice for tank compositions. As far as the rest of these guys here, Therese, Galeno, and Kyle, not really. William is definitely one of the more free-to-play options. He has that AoE defense down that has 80% chance. It goes up to 100 if he's booked, but 80% is usually good enough. And then, like I said, he applies that counterattack to your entire team, which is really cool, to allow them to do more attacks. And then he has a joint attack on his basic ability, along with a trait that makes your team's basic abilities do more damage. So he's got a really, really nice kit. He used to be like one of the main players in speed dungeons, and he's still a viable option to this day. The thing is, though, is there's just other teams that are better. Not to say that he is bad. It's just better teams have come out where they're faster. So if you have William and you're starting out, he's a really great option to build your team around. So Hori, Helmar, Andre, Nolia, no, not really. Hakron is nice for the tank comps. He gives your team a crap ton of defense. It'll be really slow, but he will help with progression, and it will be safe. Bocce might be able to clear some waves, to be honest, just because he is a really, really good character, and he might do enough damage on the witch herself to make Zitlin comps viable as well. So if you want to play around with that, I think that's probably a viable option. Jonathan, I think, is great here. He pairs well with Aaron as well to put multiple buffs up to possibly trigger Aaron's ultimate ability. And he also gives your team shield whenever the witch and her minions do, AoE abilities, as well as giving, attack down and defense down on everyone on the enemy team. So pretty cool. Obviously, if they have those no positive effects up, his shield won't be viable, so you have to play around with the speed tuning on that. Mila, Hazel, not really. Hazel is a pretty interesting character, but I don't think she fits in here. Rosalind, not really. Timmons is interesting as well. He does these bonus attacks with his ultimate ability. So anytime that one of your allies attacks an elite or a boss, he will come in if there's more than 3 enemies alive, and use his ultimate ability, which is an AoE. And I've seen some recent videos come out that have Timmons in a speed run, which is kind of cool. So I think he's probably a viable option for PvE. I will say that obviously in PvP content, elites aren't really used, and then heroes in PvP aren't considered bosses. So he's pretty much useless outside of PvE, but he might be a pretty viable option to help with Witch as well. Not only with the waves, but also doing those joint attacks to reduce that lightning orb count. Virgil has kind of fallen off the map, not really relevant. Santis is definitely useful with the Gangello poison comps all the way up to Hell Stage 2. Lordric, no. Nathalia is your premier wave clearer. She scales really well with Queen of Tides, Ash, and Witch of the Wind. So, Nathalia is definitely a really, really great option for PvE content if you want to book someone. My Nathalia is booked. I use her in dungeons still to this day, and she's used in my witch dungeon, which we'll see here in a second. So Poros, I don't think he's really viable right now. Same thing with Aphroine, Lydia. Lyerly is interesting because she does do joint attacks. But she also grants herself counterattack as well. So she might be viable, but I do not have her to really know. I think I've seen maybe one team with Lyerly, but other than that, I don't know if she's that viable. Okay, so that is the index. I do just want to show you my team real quick. We'll talk about some of the mechanics in which while we do this. So I have Shane and Florence as well as Opal and Nathalia. So my Nathalia and Opal are booked. My Florence and Shane are not. But the way that this team composition works is Florence will go first, then Shane, and then Nathalia and Opal. So let's just run through this real quick, and I'll show you how this works. And then we'll end the video. Okay, so right here, Florence went, used her ultimate, gave everyone a shield. And then Shane is going to go, but then Florence's ultimate is here to grant the additional attack with the person's basic. So Shane will go. He gives his special ability, which is additional damage and attack up on the hero with the highest attack. Nathalia then goes and then almost clears the wave. This actually works out in my favor because it allows Opal to get her ultimate ability off here. And then next turn, Florence's basic goes, Shane's basic goes, and then Shane has this really great trait where he has these little stacks of like additional damage. You could kind of see them there. Next to people's icons, like this little yellow icon right here. So we'll actually pause this real quick. So if you see this here, this is Shane's ability. So it looks like every attack that you do, it goes up 2% with the amount of damage that you deal. So he put up that Law of Karma, like I said, that deals that extra 30% of damage if someone is attacking outside of their turn. This is really relevant for this team because Opal has that joint ally attack, and every time one of my teammates attacks, if she has that joint attack up, she will attack with that teammate, which means she'll be doing attacks outside of her turn, which apply to that Law of Karma from Shane, right? So she'll be doing 30% additional damage from that debuff on the boss. So then Nathalia is going to go, and then Opal will joint attack and do a lot of damage. And then Opal's turn, use the ultimate ability, and you just see how much damage that she's actually doing here. So here, the witch went into her thunder mode, right? And this is where she grants that lightning orb at the start of the round, which is 5 of them. Now, the thing is my team also specializes in reducing this bar, right? So every hit will reduce this bar, and then the witch's attacks will do a lot less damage to my team, especially if it's completely reduced. She won't have any additional benefit from her attacks consuming those lightning orbs. So Florence goes, she uses her basic ability twice because of her ultimate, while Opal was also joining her attacks, and then at that point, she's just dead. Well, I guess she was at 1%. But here she puts up those bleeds and no positive effects. But this is my speed team whenever it's 2 times speed on auto, and then outside of like whenever you put it on background, it's about 1 minute and 5 seconds or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of my guide on Witch of the Wind, guys. I hope this was helpful. I hope you have some ideas of types of team compositions that you're looking for to help you beat Witch of the Wind. Outside of those speed teams, you're going to have to bring in other people, like Marion Shadowblood or William to give you bonus attacks. But yeah, that's all I got for you today. Hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.